spaced reconstruction. So there's a few different ways that you can use spaced reconstruction. I already talked about, well, you can draw things out, you can ask yourself questions, you can challenge yourself after you read a book to write up a one-pager on what you learned. And obviously you can use things like flashcards. So flashcards is probably the most popular method of spaced reconstruction. This is the best way to build a strong memory, no matter if you're using visual mnemonics or not, or some other sort of mnemonics or not. It's the best way to build strong memories. It's just, what are you reconstructing? That becomes the question. If you're reconstructing visual mnemonics, for example, you're going to need fewer repetitions to get the same level of memorization of, well, how long is this memory going to last? How strong is it going to be? How instantly can I bring it back? So that's an important feature of just changing and trying to get more of what the repetitions that you're doing away from just reviewing things and trying to reconstruct it in one way or another. Just challenge your brain more, but not make it something that's so difficult or time consuming where you can't get through all the stuff that you need to review. So this is something that ideally you should be building into your reading process. This is something that you can be doing as you're reading, especially right after you read a book. And it's something that you need to get a few experience of. So it's not something that necessarily you have to do every time, but now that you're learning this, the next book or next article that you read or next few things that you read or serious knowledge products that you consume, maybe it's a video, maybe it's going to a live conference, maybe it's a conversation, is challenge yourself after you go through that to just try to reconstruct as much as possible so that you can get a baseline of, okay, this is where my memory is right now. This is what I'm getting right now. And then you can also try that, and you can and once you see how little you're actually remembering, then you can take it out to a week. Just take something, well, what did you read about a week ago, or maybe even 2 weeks ago? Just stop this video and take out a piece of paper and try to reconstruct, well, what did I learn from that? Or even tap it into your phone, or even just say it to yourself in your head. Try to reconstruct and see how much actually comes out. And you're going to realize not much, not nearly as much as what you should be remembering. And that's going to give you a baseline, and it's also going to feed your motivation to put time and energy into this stuff, into setting up these systems so that you can get these repetitions, so that you can get that strong memory and that command over the information. Because when you don't have that, you don't have that basic confidence that you know what you're talking about. And that's really important no matter what industry, no matter what domain, no matter what business or job or profession that you're in. So it's really important to get that motivation to do this stuff, because that's one of the things that I struggled with at the beginning, that a lot of people struggle with, is getting the motivation to do this stuff. Even though you know you need to do it, that's not the same thing as having the experience, which gives you that emotional fuel to actually do it, to take the time out, to actually set things up, to go through the friction that you have anytime you're a beginner at anything, and get past that stage to where it becomes a lot easier, just becomes a natural part of who you are and how you live every day and how you learn. So those are the positives. And last thing I'll say about this is it's great for test preparation. So some of you out there are students, some of you out there are preparing for some sort of professional exam, or you want to get into a graduate program, or you need to pass some licensing thing, and so you need to take a test. And it depends partially on how much you want to retain long term. So short term, if it's something where you want to pass the test and then it's okay to forget most of what you learn, then drilling things in with flashcards can be a great way to do that. But it's not necessarily something long term. Are you going to want to be using these flashcards for the coming months and years? And are you going to have the software, and are you going to be comfortable doing all these repetitions staring at a computer, staring at your phone? Is that something that you can see yourself enjoying doing? Because ideally you want to have a learning system where you enjoy each stage of the process. And I really enjoy each stage of the process when I'm doing it with paper in my hand, and I enjoy doing that away from the computer. So a lot of these things, the ideal system is using a piece of technology, but it's just, I get eye fatigue when I'm staring at a screen for too long. It's usually not great for your posture to be looking at any sort of screen for that long. And I just enjoy being able to really focus, have a piece of paper in front of me, use a different colored pen, annotate it, get all of that extra stuff, and then be able to assemble it and synthesize. Because each time you get a repetition, ideally you should be seeing deeper into the framework and system. You should be seeing things that you didn't see before, especially when you're interleaving your learning. So maybe you're reading a book on some really complicated aspect of programming something, and then you go and you read a cooking book or a gardening book or something like that. Then you come back a month later and you start, those metaphors start intermingling. That interleaving starts to give you some benefits. There's some cross-pollination there, and you start to understand things in a different way. You start to simplify things like an expert does, start to see those deeper patterns that make everything else, those more surface level patterns, obvious. So it's like you no longer need to memorize it because it's an obvious offspring of that deeper parent idea. So that's the level you want to get to. And so that's part of what I'm talking about with Reconstruction, is also when you're doing these reviews or these reconstructions, is create something new out of that, create a new synthesis out of that. And that happens when you're doing things like interleaving your learning and just taking some time away and then coming back. You should be seeing deeper patterns, and that's something where you should be writing those things down. So review shouldn't be something where you're just looking at a piece of paper and then flipping the page. Try to make it as interactive as possible. There's going to be a lot of different ways, and each of you listening to this, you're going to have different things that you prefer to do. Some of you may feel very artistic, so you want to go in that direction. Others of you really like implementing things and taking action immediately, so that's going to be your path. So whatever it is, try to make it more interactive. Try to really interact as much as possible with whatever you're reviewing. The downside of a lot of this stuff is, as I said, it takes too much time. Sometimes things can't even fit on flashcards, or it takes a lot of time. If you like drawing things out or doing things by hand and then having to get that into computer, or maybe you don't type very quickly, or it's just annoying and you don't like creating a ton of flashcards, or the whole process of converting things into questions and answers. So there's a lot of cognitive strain, there's a lot of fatigue. And part of what happens is when you finish reading a book, maybe you're really excited and you want to put something into action, or there's another book that you're really excited to start, or something else happens, or you just feel like you're too familiar with the information. You don't feel like going back and looking at it again yet. So you put it away and you just don't feel like creating these flashcards. You don't feel like putting in a lot more effort on the book. You kind of just want to let it sit and take another look at it later. So that's one of the biggest problems with spaced reconstruction, is that it's just not always fun to do, especially in the traditional format of things like flashcards. So it takes a ton of time, especially with very complex systemic level, framework level things. And if you're thinking, well, I'm not learning anything that's really systemic, really framework, actually that's probably not true. You're probably just learning from materials where the author themselves doesn't understand things in a systemic way, or they do understand it in a systemic way, but that's not how they teach it, or they understand that system unconsciously, but they don't really have a conscious grasp of it. And so always be looking for those frameworks ahead of time, because once you understand the framework, everything else seems to fall in place. It feels a lot easier. So that's one of the biggest mistakes, is thinking that, well, I just need to memorize all of this kind of surface level stuff, the leaves on the tree. But what happens is, if you understand the trunk and how everything else works, the leaves on the tree are fairly obvious and they don't take a ton of effort to memorize. So sometimes it's the deeper philosophy behind your overall learning approach, of how much are you focusing on those frameworks, on those systems. That's one of the strengths of these 3 courses put together, is that you're not just getting, oh, this is how you read, or this is how you take notes, or this is how you do memory, but they're all integrated into this larger flow chart, or this larger workflow or learning flow of, this is how you take any information, any type of way you like to consume content, whether it's reading, whether it's listening to things, watching videos, conversations, live conventions or seminars, or mentoring, or somebody coaching you, or whatever it is, whatever way you like to learn, how do you take that and then take it through a process to where you're taking action on it, you've got it memorized, you've got it scheduled for spaced repetitions, all these different things. So that's why all this stuff is integrated. All this stuff is part of a system. No matter what you're learning, there's a system that exists. Somebody has that information, and it's your job to go out and find that. And then structure your learning and your reviewing so that first you have that framework really solid, because that's going to make memorizing everything else a lot easier. It's also going to structure your memory. When your memory is not structured properly, it's just like a building. If you're building a building with really crappy internal structure and a really bad foundation, everything else is going to be more difficult. There's always going to be additional problems, and it's going to take a lot more time. So that's why starting out, making sure you get that foundation, that framework set up first, is going to make memorizing everything else, building that knowledge structure, a lot easier. And we're going to be getting even more into that when we talk about visual mnemonics, because this stuff plays a huge part in mnemonics as well.